Tonight, we don't look for monsters under the bed. We look at the empty space where the bed used to be, at a scene so clean it screams violation, at a mystery so profound it has become a permanent scar on the landscape of a quiet American city. We are going to Springfield, Missouri. The year is 1992, and three women are about to walk out of their lives and into a silent, unending void.
Welcome to the Scary Stories channel with Mr. Merc.
The air on Saturday, 1992, in Springfield, Missouri, was thick with the promise of summer. It was a heavy, humid blanket, scented with freshly cut lawns, blooming honeysuckle, and the faint, celebratory tang of charcoal grills. For Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall, it was more than just the start of summer. It was the start of their lives. That day, they had walked across the stage at Kickapoo High School's graduation ceremony, diplomas in hand, the world stretching before them like an unwritten page. Susie, at 18, was a vibrant splash of color against the world's beige canvas. Her hair was a wild, bleached blonde halo, her style a testament to the grunge era aesthetic of art and apathy, though hers was anything but. She was a budding cosmetologist, just like her mother, with an artist's soul and a magnetic, sometimes reckless, energy. Stacy, 19, was her foil and her anchor. With a warm smile and kind, steady eyes, she was the responsible one, the planner. Her future was mapped out with a quiet determination, a future she was eager to begin. The two girls were part of a tight-knit group of friends, celebrating their shared milestone with the frantic, joyous energy that only the young and newly freed possess. Their day bled into a night of party hopping, a constellation of small gatherings across the suburban sprawl of Springfield. They drove in Susie's tan Ford Escort, the windows down, music blasting, the humid night air whipping through their hair. They moved from a friend's house to another, their laughter echoing in the sleepy, tree-lined streets. It was a night of perfect, unblemished normalcy. A night of lasts, though they could never have known it. Around 2:00 a.m. on what was now the morning of Sunday, June 7, the celebrations began to wind down. Susie and Stacy had originally planned to spend the night at their friend Janelle Kirby's house, continuing the party with a sleepover in her waterbed. But Janelle's house was crowded, and the girls, seeking a bit more space and comfort, made a last-minute change of plans. They would go to Susie's house at 1717 East Delmar Street. Susie lived there with her mother, Cheryl Levitt. At 47, Cheryl was a woman forged by hard work and resilience. A professional cosmetologist with a loyal clientele, she was known for her meticulous nature and her deep, protective love for Susie. She was a woman who noticed things, who kept her house in immaculate order, a small, pale yellow sanctuary of calm in a world that wasn't always kind. She had spent her evening at home, painting a large chest of drawers, speaking to a friend on the phone around 11:15 p.m., her voice tired but content. After that, she had settled into bed with a book, the light on her nightstand casting a warm glow. Sometime after 2:15 a.m., the tan Ford Escort pulled into the driveway of 1717 East Delmar. The street was quiet, wrapped in the deep pre-dawn stillness of suburbia. Porch light, a glass globe fixture, should have been on, a small beacon in the dark. But it wasn't. This was the last moment that Susie Streeter, Stacy McCall, and Cheryl Levitt were known to be part of the living world. The moment the door to the little yellow house closed behind them, they stepped over a threshold, not just into a home, but into an American nightmare. The next morning, the sun rose on a world that was, for a few precious hours, blissfully unaware of the hole that had been torn in its fabric. Janelle Kirby, expecting to hear from her friends, began to worry when calls to the Delmar Street house went unanswered. Stacy had plans to meet her later that day. By the afternoon, a knot of anxiety had tightened in Janelle's stomach. She and her boyfriend, Mike, decided to drive over. They arrived at the house around midday. The first thing they noticed was the strangeness of the scene. All three cars were there, Cheryl's, Susie's, and Stacy's. This immediately deflated the theory that they had gone somewhere. They wouldn't have left all their vehicles. The front door was unlocked. This was unusual for Cheryl, who was known for her cautious nature. As Janelle pushed the door open, a small, white Yorkshire Terrier, Cinnamon, came bounding out, yapping with what sounded like a mix of excitement and distress. The dog seemed agitated, but was unharmed. Inside, the house was eerily silent. The only sound was the faint, blue-white flicker and hum of the television, which had been left on in the living room. It was tuned to a static-filled channel, a ghost of a broadcast playing to an empty room. The house was tidy, almost unnervingly so. In the living room, Cheryl's cigarettes and lighter were on a small table. In her bedroom, the bed was turned down as if she'd been reading and was interrupted. Her book lay open, face down on the nightstand, her reading glasses resting beside it. Her purse was there. Susie and Stacy's room showed similar signs of their arrival. Their purses, containing their keys and wallets, were lined up neatly on the floor. Their clothes from the previous night were in a small pile. Stacy's medication, which she needed to take daily, was sitting on a counter. Everything they would have needed to simply leave, keys, money, identification, was left behind. It looked less like a departure and more like an abduction from the very state of existence. But as Janelle and Mike looked closer, a single, jarring detail shattered the illusion of peace. On the front porch, the glass globe of the porch light was broken. Shards of glass littered the concrete, but they weren't scattered wildly, as they would be from an accidental break. Someone had meticulously swept the shards into a neat little pile against the porch wall. It was a gesture of impossible tidiness in the face of what could only have been a moment of violence or panic. It was a detail so bizarre, so out of place, that it felt like a signature. A growing sense of dread, cold and heavy, settled over Janelle. She used the house phone to call Stacy's mother, Janice McCall. When she heard Janelle's trembling voice describing the scene, the unlocked door, the cars, the purses, the television, Janice felt a mother's primal fear ignite. She told Janelle not to touch anything and that she was on her way. When Janice arrived, the scene struck her with an even greater force. She walked through the silent rooms, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She saw her daughter's belongings, the testament to a life paused mid-motion. Then she noticed the answering machine in the kitchen. The light was blinking. A message. With trembling hands, she pressed the play button, desperate for any clue. any voice that could explain the impossible emptiness of the house. A man's voice filled the kitchen. It was strange, filled with what police would later describe as lewd and bizarre innuendo, a sexually suggestive message that made no sense in this context. Janice listened, her mind reeling. Then, in a moment of panic and confusion, she would regret for the rest of her life, she hit the delete button, erasing the message to clear the machine for any potential calls from Stacy. A second, unheard message was deleted along with it. In that one simple human act, what may have been the only audible clue to the fate of the three women was lost forever. By the time the Springfield Police Department arrived, the scene had been hopelessly compromised. Well-meaning friends and family had come and gone, touching surfaces, moving items, inadvertently erasing the faint fingerprints of whatever phantom had passed through the house that night. The investigation began as a missing persons case, but it lacked any of the usual hallmarks. There was no ransom note for a kidnapping. There was no evidence of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass inside, no blood. The women had simply vanished. Police canvassed the neighborhood. A neighbor reported hearing a woman scream around 2:30 a.m., but had dismissed it as late-night revelry. Another thought they saw a strange, dark green or brown panel van, possibly a Dodge, circling the area in the early morning hours. The leads were thin, ethereal, like trying to catch smoke in a net. Days bled into weeks. The faces of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy stared out from flyers posted on telephone poles and in store windows. The story gripped the nation, a terrifying modern folktale of disappearance from the perceived safety of a suburban home. The media descended, dubbing them the Springfield Three. Psychics offered visions, and crackpot callers offered false hope and cruel hoaxes. The police investigation turned inward, looking at the women's lives. They interviewed ex-boyfriends, estranged relatives, and casual acquaintances. Susie had recently broken up with a young man, and there were rumors of jealousy. But nothing concrete emerged. Cheryl had an ex-husband and a complex history, but again, no solid leads materialized. The investigation was a sprawling map of dead ends. Years passed. The yellow house on Delmar Street became a dark landmark, a place tourists would slow down to look at. Its cheerful color, a mockery of the mystery it held. The hope that had once burned so brightly in the hearts of their families began to flicker, sputtering against the cold, hard wind of time. It transformed into a dull, constant ache of not knowing. The not knowing was its own special kind of torture, a wound that could never be allowed to scar over. Was it a random home invasion that went horribly wrong? Was it a targeted attack by someone they knew, a wolf they had unwittingly invited into their lives? Was the broken porch light a signal? A distraction? A sign of a brief, desperate struggle before the silence fell? Theories swirled like vultures. One of the most persistent centered on a man named Robert Craig Cox, a convicted kidnapper and robber who had been living in Springfield at the time. When interviewed in a Texas prison years later, Cox played a cruel game with investigators. He claimed he knew the women were dead and buried, but that he would never reveal where unless his mother's name was cleared of a minor offense. He told a journalist that the women were buried near a concrete foundation somewhere in the Springfield area, But his story was inconsistent, a tantalizing and sadistic breadcrumb trail leading nowhere. He was a monster, toying with their grief. Another tip led investigators to excavate a corner of the parking garage at a local hospital, acting on a tip from a man who claimed to have seen suspicious activity with a ground-penetrating radar. For a few tense days, the city held its breath. They dug up the concrete, finding only dirt and rock. Another dead end. The silence from that night on Delmar Street simply grew louder. Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, became a fierce, tireless advocate for her daughter and the other two women. She founded a support group for families of the missing, channeling her unimaginable pain into action. But the weight of the unknown was a crushing burden. The world moved on. Seasons changed. The 90s gave way to a new millennium. The flyers faded and were torn down. The girls, forever frozen in their graduation photos, became ghosts. Their story, a chilling local legend. In 1997, 5 years after they vanished, Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall were declared legally dead. There was no funeral, no grave to visit, no finality. There was only an official piece of paper, a legal acknowledgement of an absence that had been a screaming reality for half a decade. The house at 1717 East Delmar Street was eventually sold. The chest of drawers Cheryl had been painting was finished by her family and placed in a loved one's home. Life, in its relentless way, grew over the hole they left behind, but it never filled it. The mystery endures not because of what was found, but because of what was not. No bodies, no definitive crime scene, no confession, no answers. The true horror of the story of the Springfield 3 isn't about a monster jumping from the shadows. It's about the terrifying realization that the fabric of our safe, orderly world is gossamer thin. It's about the fact that 3 human beings, with futures and families and dreams, could be present one moment and utterly gone the next, erased from a locked house in the heartland of America, leaving behind only their cars, their purses, and a question mark that hangs in the air to this day. Cold and sharp as a shard of broken glass, they walked through a door and into nothingness, and the silence they left behind is the most terrifying sound of all. The echoes of that empty house still linger. Now, I want you to step into the role of the investigator. Stare into the abyss of this story and tell me what you see. What do you think happened in the silent hours after 2:15 a.m. at 1717 East Delmar Street? Was this the work of a stranger who saw an opportunity, or the terrifying final act of someone they knew and trusted? That meticulously swept pile of broken glass on the porch? Was it a moment of cold, calculated cleanup by a killer, or a bizarre final act of a victim trying to leave a sign? And the most chilling question of all, one that separates a simple crime from something far more sinister. How can 3 people from inside a home with no signs of a struggle in the middle of a quiet city simply cease to be? Leave your theories, your fears, and your thoughts in the comments below. Let's sift through the darkness together. Until next time, sleep well. And maybe, just maybe, remember to check your porch light.